Sandra. So today, I'd like for us to discuss some of the practicalities of implementing change. The plan is to give an overview of some of the strategies and techniques that people have previously found helpful. If there are resources or materials that you've found which you think could be useful to others, I'd be very grateful if you could please share the links with us in the chat. There should also be some time left at the end of this session for us to collectively discuss our thoughts about ways to successfully introduce change. In order to develop a successful strategy for change, it's important to understand the process. One way is to conceptualize it and consider the situation as it is and the desired future state. Describing this vision is sometimes difficult. It can be helpful to pose the question, if I came back in a year's time, what do I hope to see in place or be achieved? Once you've answered this, it's possible to start thinking about what you need to do to bridge the gap between the current and the desired state in order to achieve your goals. From this point of view, change is a process that requires letting go of previous practice and introducing new, better ones. There are many reasons why we might want to introduce change, but at the heart of most of them is the desire to ensure we're providing the best care for patients. There is also the need to adapt in response to external factors, such as new technologies, procedures, regulatory requirements. In order to do this, we might need to implement changes in processes, systems, or organisational culture to improve the outcomes or increase efficiency. I'm sure we can all think of examples when change was not necessarily beneficial. Therefore, when thinking about introducing change, it's important firstly to make sure it's worthwhile and relevant to the particular population or setting, before becoming concerned with the complexity of the process itself. It's often suggested there are three main stages to change. Firstly, planning, which involves setting goals and objectives for the change in question. Secondly, implementation. For any change to happen, it must be effectively implemented. And thirdly, monitoring evaluation. When a transformation has been set in motion, it's essential to monitor the progress so that we can adapt as necessary. Considering each of these in turn could help us map out the journey to implementing change. So, implementing change can be particularly challenging in health and social care because of the complex relationships between a wide range of organisations, professionals, patients and carers, etc. Which is one reason why careful planning can be so valuable. An important first step is to analyse the current situation and ask some key questions, such as, why do we want the change? Why is this change important to you, to the organisation, other staff members and patients, etc.? What do we want to achieve? And what metrics can we use to show we've been successful? Answering these will let you know why the change is necessary. Documenting the need for change can help you communicate and get agreement about the reasons for change and the longer term vision. You may need to sell your proposal. Having it clearly set out can help you persuade others of its value. This might be significant if we consider the results of a study by Leadership IQ, which surveyed more than 30,000 employees and discovered that merely 15% stated that they always understand the rationale behind their organisation's change strategy. Once we've recorded the potential benefits of change, we can begin to plan for change itself and anticipate potential pitfalls and problems. Making change to services or organisations can often be tricky. Top-down change especially can feel threatening and destabilising, making it more difficult for some colleagues to see the potential benefits. Consequently, it's advisable to involve all the key players from the outset, including all the people who can have a final say about how change will take place in the planning, can increase the chances that the proposed change will be implemented as agreed. This notion is supported by research, which suggests that change is more likely to succeed when healthcare professionals feel prepared for it. When you're planning to spread change, it's perhaps advisable to find one or more or two priority settings where authentic adaptation of the innovation can take place. Evidence of this success can then be used to convince stakeholders working in other areas that the change is effective, sustainable, and delivers real benefits. Change cannot happen, though, without implementation. Implementation is about putting your change plan into action. It's the how you're going to do it, as well as the what you want to do. Unfortunately, many interventions that have proven effective in practice fail to deliver expected health benefits because they're poorly implemented. The need for essential mobilisation of knowledge is perhaps one of the reasons the field of implementation science has developed so rapidly. In the first edition of the Implementation Science Journal, published in December 2006, Eccles and Mittman described implementation science as the scientific study of methods to promote the systematic uptake of research findings and other evidence-based practices into routine practice to improve the quality and effectiveness of healthcare and services. Implementation science is still a fairly new field of study, and there are different published definitions of what it involves. Some emphasise closing the no-do gap, where others emphasise producing generalisable knowledge or locally fit solutions. Regardless of how we conceptualise it, the theories, models and frameworks produced by implementation science hold the potential to help us develop strategies that can mobilise the findings of clinical research into frontline health and social care practice. Many implementation scientists would recommend using an implementation framework or multiple frameworks to facilitate the process of implementation. There are many frameworks designed to help you embed a comprehensive strategy for change. Most of these frameworks seek to clarify the key elements change requires. These are based either on a mix of published research and practical experience. A large number of theories, models and frameworks are now available in the Implementation Science Toolkit. This can make it difficult to determine which are the most appropriate, and more frameworks are published each year. Just as not all theories are considered equally important, so some implementation frameworks are likely to be more relevant to you than others. Happily, several authors have conducted systematic reviews of the published implementation guidance. This one is by Nilsson, for instance, who's proposed a taxonomy that distinguishes between different categories of theories, models and frameworks to support us make an appropriate selection. It could be worthwhile having a look at several reviews yourself to help think about which framework or frameworks might be most suitable to help you implement a particular change. Involving people who use health and care services, carers and communities in equal partnership to produce implementation strategies has become increasingly common. Co-production is part of a range of approaches that seek to ensure effective participation of patients, members of the public and other stakeholders in healthcare improvement. While there's no one single universal definition of co-production, many people agree that a major goal is to enable end users of research to shape its selection, design, delivery, dissemination, implementation, and impact. Co-production has become widespread because of its potential to improve the quality and relevance of research, and also improve the patient and carer experience of services. Its emphasis is inclusivity, empowerment, and mutual respect among stakeholders, including patients and the public, clinicians, service providers and researchers. Co-production, therefore, involves an equal sharing of power and working together to find solutions throughout the research and implementation process. Co-production acknowledges that people with lived experience of a particular condition are often best placed to advise on what support and services will make an improvement to their lives. Notably, it has the potential to address inequalities by enabling us to better understand the context in which change is to happen. Although it may take longer to co-produce implementation strategies, it's worth doing, as it can significantly enhance the quality of implementation and, many would argue, reduce costs. And now I would like to introduce Sandra once again, who's going to tell us about why it's so important to implement research into practice. So I'm going to stop sharing now so that you can see Sandra. Hopefully, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
people can see me. Yes, I would just like to, before I make my point, one of the studies that I was involved in the early 2000s was a study called the LIFE Project, Long-Term Inclusive Fitness Project, and it was based at Oxford Brookes University. And the idea was to, for people, for their physiotherapy to continue, for them to use community gyms. And it went very well. The project was liked. People said they liked it. And but none of the recommendations from that project, as far as I know, have been implemented to any degree, because it is still difficult for people like me, a wheelchair user, to just become a member, pop down to the local gym and use the equipment. And that study was commissioned by an advisory group, which I sat on for 7 years, to commission implementation research, and that was one of the studies. So I'm still hoping to find a gym that I can just join as a member of the public. But the point I'd like to make to you is, out of that not being implemented, the researchers who did all that hard work, bringing their research studies together, getting the grant to do it, which included people like me contributing, they miss out because their research has been done, but it goes no further. And then people like me miss out because we can't do something like physical fitness to keep our health maintained in good order, which governments always want people to do. So that's my point to you. If things aren't implemented, if you're not thinking them through in the way that's just been said before, it's what are we all doing? That's what I'd say to you. That's all, because if it doesn't get implemented, it's no good.
Thank you, Sandra. That's really interesting. So what I'd like to do now on the subject of co-production is share a brief video with you, which we made as part of one of our research studies at ARC East Midlands. And I hope this works. I've got to remind myself to share computer sound on this one. So if you can't hear it, please let me know, everyone.
Nothing happening so far, Rob. Am I just being very impatient?
Okay, let's try again.
Research participants and partners have helped us to develop some advice for those new to co-production. We would like to share some tips that might help in your co-production journey. You need to have a clear understanding of the experience, knowledge or expertise, or what you would like co-production partners to contribute to the research study. It is a good idea to describe and justify the criteria for including or excluding co-production partners. Try to be as inclusive as possible. Don't include people just because you know them or believe they will agree with your view about the research. Patients, the public and other stakeholders involved in co-production should be considered partners in the research process rather than participants. All parties involved in co-producing the research should have parity in the decision-making process, meaning that everyone's views and opinions are heard and equally valued. Any possible disagreements that develop throughout the decision-making process should be resolved using methods that give all parties a chance to discuss the solution. A co-produced studies governance or steering group should include patients, carers, or other stakeholder representatives. This can be people who have lived experience of the subject under investigation, as well as other experts, such as health and care service commissioners and medical practitioners. Keep in mind that patients, caregivers, and other members of the public are contributing essential advice and ideas that will help to improve the research. Ensure this is a positive and stimulating experience for them. Discover the support and resources all team members will require to successfully take part in co-production. Consider providing training, mentoring, or other chances for development as appropriate. There is a duty of care for all those taking part in the study, including co-production partners. Ensure no harm comes to anyone as a result of being involved in your research. Consider how co-production partners' advice and expertise will be included after the study's active phase is completed, for instance, in the dissemination or implementation of research. When it comes to co-producing a research study, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. However, it's always critical to respect and value new team members' skills, experience, and contributions. Working with a group of people who have different points of view and ideas can be rewarding and greatly enhance the quality of the research.
I'd like to thank Emma for her contribution to the voiceover there, and also Fred Higton for providing the animation cartoons. If you might want to check out some of his other work, if you go to YouTube and Google Fred cartoons, all one word, then you can find more of his excellent work. So anyway, speaking of engagement and communication with stakeholders, it's probably a good idea to identify everyone who needs to be involved in planning and the implementation of change, so that you can engage with them in an open dialogue. Speaking with a range of people who will be impacted by change can provide key information that will support better decision making and thereby improve the chances of success. Failing to engage one or more stakeholder groups, on the other hand, may lead to threats to implementing change, as key facts can be overlooked. A stakeholder can be anyone who can gain or potentially lose out as a result of change being implemented. A useful resource to help ensure that we include a wide range of stakeholders is the 9 C's produced by NIHR Innovation and Improvement. These categories provide helpful guidance for thinking about stakeholder engagement, involvement, and co-production. Another good way of beginning to think about who your potential stakeholders are could be to talk to your internal, external, formal or informal networks. They'll probably also be able to share experience of workarounds, ideas to help you reach your goals, and share their experiences. A stakeholder matrix is a relatively straightforward tool for analysing who to involve in a project. While there are different types of matrices, they all have the purpose of supporting stakeholder mapping. They enable us to assess stakeholders against certain criteria and plot them on a graph. A common way to plot stakeholders is by power or influence on the y-axis and interest in the innovation on the x-axis. In these examples, we'd probably want to work most closely with those plotted in the top right-hand boxes, as they will have the highest interest in the change taking place and the influence to make it happen. The benefits of using a stakeholder matrix include making your analysis easier to undertake and understand, creating an accessible point of reference, and providing a visual aid to help explain the importance of key players. A number of different mapping templates are available, which you might like to check out. And once again, I would like to hand over to Sandra, who is going to talk to us a little bit about why equality, diversity and inclusion are so important for authentic stakeholder engagement.
Thank you. Yes, it is really important, because what you need are the people that can accurately or nearly accurately reflect the population that we live in. And equality, diversity and inclusion, in my view, one of the difficulties of that is the inclusivity, because it is, you can have a very fairly equal, very diverse room of people, but the inclusivity of how those people engage with you can often be forgotten. And for me, in our project, one of the things we always suggest researchers ask right at the beginning, with their public members, if possible. If we design it this way, if we do it this way, who might we exclude? And that is, you know, it gets you thinking about the different stages of your research, but in particular about the research activity, which is going to bring participants in. So if you're just designing a form, is it possible that anyone could be excluded from answering that survey for you? That comes from that fundamental question. In addition to that, I think it will be a stronger project if you've got an inclusive group of people helping you, and it's just very important that fundamental question: if we do it this way, who might we exclude? Because then you haven't, if that's a big population of people, you're not getting their views in about the topic you're trying to answer the question to. So that's my main advice for that. It's very, very important.
Thank you, Sandra. Really helpful, as ever. So what I'd like to do, please, if you can, is I'd like to ask everyone, if they don't mind, to open the chat in Teams. Now, I haven't done this before, and it might go horribly wrong. And if it does, there is no plan B. Is the good news. So what I want to do is ask a series of questions as our group activity. And as a bit of a warm-up, what I'd like us to try and do is please rank in order with the one you think took the shortest amount of time at the top and the one that took the longest amount of time at the bottom. Now, don't worry, because we're not sharing names. We're just going to share results. So on this picture here, number 1 is President Kennedy saying, "We choose to go to the moon," to Neil Armstrong taking his one giant leap. The second one is the average length of time research has indicated it takes identified best practice to reach changes in medical practice. And number 3 is breaking ground on the Burj Khalifa, which I believe is still the world's tallest building, to the grand opening. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and open a poll in chat, and I'm hoping that we'll all be able to use this. So this is the first one, so I'm hoping you're going to be able to see this any second now. So if you could have a go at that, please, I'd be very grateful.
Alert from calendar, black bin.
I'll give everyone just a second to do that. We've got 15 responses in so far, which is brilliant. So it's obviously sort of working. Oh, 16. Excellent. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in this survey. We've got a couple more after this. As I say, this one just a bit of a warm up. So we've got 18 responses in at the moment, and we've got Kennedy as number 1 as the on our poll, Burj Khalifa, and as I think nearly everyone has guessed now, best practice is probably the longest it takes. So the answer is, if anyone's interested, ranking is the shortest amount of time was the Burj Khalifa. It took just 6 years. So the foundation and excavation work started in January 2004 and it finished in January 2010. The second was Kennedy's speech to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon, which was just under 7 years. And finally, as I think many of you might have known, the average time it takes for best practice generated through research to reach frontline practice and be adopted is 17 years, which shows that implementing change is not a straightforward business, unlike building buildings or going to the moon. So that's really, thank you very much for taking part in that. I've got a couple more that I'd like you to take part in, please, later on. So I'd just like to share a slide with you before we do the next one. Hopefully you can all see that. So we're going to talk about resistance to change. So it has been suggested that organisations experience a 70% failure rate when attempting to achieve their desired goals. Although there's relatively limited knowledge about the factors that cause resistance to change, it's widely regarded as the main reasons for change initiatives failing. I'd like us now, please, to start thinking about some of the reasons resistance to change might occur, and then start thinking about how we can overcome them. Firstly, if we look at individual factors, so attitudes towards change can be positive, negative, or neutral. Obviously, resistance to change is probably based on negative and defensive feelings towards change. There's research indicating that some staff members are likely to be highly apprehensive and hold negative expectations regarding change in organisations. So I would like us to think about this question. It's the same process as before. So obviously people respond to different stimuli when it comes to thinking about change. So can we please order these strategies in terms of which you think are the most likely to the least likely to persuade people change is a good idea? With most likely to persuade at the top. So the things are setting out a convincing case for change, being prepared to undertake change yourself, so actions as well as words, getting other people involved in suggesting and making change, and being willing to adapt your change plans based on feedback, or perhaps you think it's something else. So I'm just going to stop sharing this now, and hopefully I'll be able to launch the next poll. So hopefully that's in the chat for everybody now. So I'll just give you a minute or two to have a think about this one and submit your answers. So thank you. I'd like to thank everybody very much for taking part in this. I know it's quite a difficult thing to do. We've got 20 responses in now, so I'll just give a couple more seconds in case anyone's still working their way through. So this is the order we've kind of all selected, is getting other people involved in suggesting the change, which I think is a really good idea, and I think that's, you know, I would agree with that's probably top. Setting out a convincing cases too. Being willing to make change based on feedback, and then it's being prepared to make the change yourself. So that's really interesting. So thank you everybody for that. And we've got just one more, but do you have any thoughts about the poll results, either Sandra or Emma, at this stage?
No. Well, I think it's interesting.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that idea of getting other people. So the next question, please, is about change fatigue, which can be thought of about as a loss of energy or willingness in stakeholders consistently impacted by change. So what we've got here is, I'm hoping this one will launch as well, is the next question. So it's this should be launched now. So this is question 2. So it's, can you rank the following with the most likely to cause change fatigue at the top and the least likely to cause change fatigue at the bottom? And the different factors are too much change all at once, inadequate planning and rollout of change, lack of communication about change initiatives, insufficient engagement of stakeholders, and leaving little room for adoption or flexibility. I'll give everyone a couple of moments to have a think about this one too. Brilliant. So I think everybody's just about done this one as well. So too much change all at once is perhaps unsurprisingly number 1. Inadequate planning and rollout is 2. So lack of communication about the change everyone's decided is 3. And insufficient stakeholder engagement is the last in the list. And leaving little room for adaptation, which I think is really very interesting. And I think I would agree with everyone that too much change all at once is a big issue. And adequate planning. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this list, but I would think, thank you for your contribution to this. It's really helpful for us and helping inform future research and things that people will be interested in finding out more about. So I'm hopefully sharing this with you now. So the next thing we'd like to look at, please, is this idea of force field analysis. So it's a method of listing and assessing the various forces for and against proposed change. It frames problems in terms of factors or pressures that support the status quo, which are restraining forces, and those pressures that support change in the desired direction. So these would be our driving forces. If we look at these, then what we can sort of see is that proposed actions come out of these. So what I'd like us to do is please think about some of the potential driving forces for change. And these might be single factors affecting organisational change, or there might be various factors. So these ones are taken from the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, which was updated in 2022. And they're selected from the inner setting domain. And so what I'd like us to do now is, as we've done before, and you'll be pleased to know this is the last one, I promise, is what we'll do is just to order these again and then have a think about what that tells us about potential forces for change within the CEFA construct. So I'm just going to stop sharing this and I will hopefully be able to launch the final poll. So I'm hoping you can now all see that. I'll just give you a couple of minutes once again to have a think. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone very much for taking part in these. I know they're not easy, but gathering this kind of information is really useful in our research. And it's really nice to know what, experts and professionals like yourselves think. So what we've ended up with the final results is feeling the current situation is intolerable, which I think that must be the number one driving force for change. Interestingly, incentives to support implementation second, which I think is something that's frequently overlooked. Then we've got matches the goals of the organisation, resources are available, and I think that's one of the things that we all need more of is time and money and facilities to introduce things. And then the innovation is more important than other initiatives last. So that's a really, we've had some movement. So the innovation is more important than other initiatives as moving up to fourth place. So that's really interesting. I don't know whether you have any thoughts about this one, Sandra, before I move on to the final part of the.
Just two, really. One, people need the resources, don't they, to
Definitely
changes, and also the importance of the innovation, because I think that relates to don't do things for the sake of change. It's got to be needed, that innovation. It's going to improve things. Not, you don't want a change made that makes things worse. So those are two I think are really important.
I completely concur. So thank you very much for your insights. So I'm just going to share the final few slides now, and then what I hope we can do is have a bit of a dialogue and talk about our feelings about change as the next stage of this meeting today. Thank you. So monitoring evaluation. So really, it's possible to gauge the success of your change by assessing whether or not it meets the predefined objectives, which were set out in the earlier planning stage. If these targets are not being attained, then additional steps can be taken to ensure the transition is achieved successfully. The main reason for monitoring progress is to ensure that the change has taken place as intended and that things have improved as a result. Gathering feedback from stakeholders can help us make adaptations that may make the change more effective and sustainable. This information can also inform decision making when planning or spreading the change elsewhere. So I would just like to say in conclusion, as Henry Ford once said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So one of the things we have to determine is, are we happy with what we've got, or is change needed? The NHS England guidance points out the importance of developing a shared purpose when bringing about change, so we can all work together and all pulling in the same direction. Therefore, it's key to work with and consult relevant stakeholders to build a consensus. You may want to determine if change is critical, important, or just nice in a particular setting when you're thinking about whether change is and where to prioritise. Also, another piece of advice I would give would be to make use of the wealth of tools and techniques available to help planning and achieving change. Stakeholder mapping, for example, can help you manage expectations of both others and yourself. Try to focus on which portions of change you have influence over and can control, so you don't waste time on things outside of your control and end up frustrated. Finally, I think this is an important one for me to bear in mind as well as everyone else. Remember, change is supposed to create success, not stress. On the slide here, firstly, I'd just like to thank you all for listening and for taking part. But please feel free to contact us if you want to discuss implementing change further. So what I would like to do is what we'd all like to do at the end of this as a conclusion is, if you have any questions, thoughts or reflections about implementing change, then we'll be very pleased to hear them. And the way we're going to do this, hopefully, is as a panel of myself, Sandra and Emma. So if you have any questions that you'd like to address now, I'm sure you've heard enough of me today. So I'd be very happy to pass over to the other panel members if you'd like to join me. So please feel free to raise your hand with any questions. While people are thinking of a question, Emma, are there any sort of top tips you would give about implementing change to the group?
Thanks, Rob.
I've dropped you under the bus.
Totally dropped in. This is how much do I know my job. Know your audience, know what you want, what they want, and make sure that your innovation delivers what they want. So we always talk to the ARC teams in terms of who, what, where, why, how. So more questions. You had your C's earlier and everything. Who's it for? Why do they want it? When do they want it? How do they want it? So I think it's about, we think about it in terms of marketing and product delivery, and we might be talking about research findings, we might be talking about a bar of chocolate from Cadbury's, exactly the same principles. And then we also we talk to people now about no cold calling, the fact that none of us likes junk mail through our letterboxes or junk mail into our email inboxes. And so actually it's about having those pathways. Academics talk about pathways to impact. We can talk about, pathways to use, dissemination pathways, stakeholder pathways, whatever. You've got to know where something's going. Once you've worked out what it is and who, you've got to know how it needs to get to them, and if there are particular times that is best, and time is best to avoid as well. So yeah, just about asking everyday questions, really. Nothing earth-shatteringly difficult.
Can I
Thank
just
you, Emma. That's really interesting. I know it's not sort of perhaps easy to join a meeting towards the end and ask questions, but I would really appreciate if anyone does have any, or indeed if they have any examples of how they've successfully implemented change themselves, or if they'd like to discuss any changes they're planning to implement and that we could perhaps think about collectively. I'll just give you a moment or two. No worries if not. We can all get away a bit early if that's the case. But just as a final thought, Sandra, are there any sort of tips from sort of a patient and public involvement perspective that you'd like to share about making change happen?
Yes, I just said earlier, I said about inclusivity, and if you're looking at people who have particular requirements to join in something, one of the easiest ways I've ever found is to just ask them. So, you don't really have to know 5,000 things about your premises being equal and diverse and inclusive. You just need to ask. I mean, if you haven't got anyone coming with a mobility problem or in a wheelchair, the search for a building without a lift or a ramp diminishes. That's only important if you know those people are coming. So I think, that's where you need to do your homework on the inclusivity bit. It doesn't require much, really. And then you can ask people like me and I'll tell you how I can join in. That's the easiest way, as far as I've ever realised. That's the easiest.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. And thank you as well, Becky, for your question. So we've got a question in the chat, which is, for a very early career clinical researcher, how would you recommend building skills preemptively? And I'm going to pass this one to our lead, Emma, to answer first, because it gives me time to think of an answer then.
Yeah, excellent. So Becky, I'd say, as Sandra said, just give it a go, actually. There isn't anything awfully wrong that you can do. I think not even trying is the worst possible thing you can do. And just talking to people and asking. Well, my PhD supervisors always used to say to me, just ask the really naive questions and you'll get away with it. And I think, as paternalistic as that might have sounded 20 years ago, it sounds even worse these days, doesn't it? But yeah, I think just asking, admitting to somebody that you're not the expert and can they help you? Are there things that you don't know that you need to be aware of? Is the best possible thing you can do. Otherwise, you kind of fall into the category of kind of arrogance of the fact that you might know better or you might make some assumptions. And that's probably why lots of innovation doesn't ever get into practice, because as researchers or innovators, we make so many assumptions about the context, about the delivery mechanism, about the stakeholders, that actually just by doing that simple thing of just asking, we forget about that. And as much as, so many academics have made a science out of what Rob's been talking about today, ultimately, as Sandra just said, just ask. really cuts through all of it. I mean, it could probably make lots of us redundant, but hey.
Well,
I agree, not with the redundancy part, but I do agree with your other comments, and I think I would agree. And the other thing I would just suggest, you can try and learn from other people who've already been involved, learn from their success, but perhaps more importantly, learn from their failures as well, of the things to avoid. And I think that's it, it's talking to people is perhaps the key. So do you have any thoughts for Becky, Sandra?
Yeah, just beware of baked in assumptions. They're there all over the place. And, we all do it, I suppose. It's a quick way of, but that has to stop, really. Some baked in assumptions might help you, but I can't think of any offhand. I'd say beware of them.
Thank you, Sandra. That's really helpful. And just, does anyone else have a final question or thought they'd like to share with us as part of the session? Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so I just wonder if anyone would like to tell us anything about their thoughts about implementing change. If not, no pressure on anyone. I'm not trying to. Well, in that case, then, just as a final concluding thought from me is that I'm really grateful for everyone for attending, and thank you very much for taking part in the polls. That will be really helpful in forming future decision making and directions of the research. And I would also just encourage people to take part in further programmes in this series. Any final remarks from either of you before we say thank you very much to everyone and close the meeting?
Just hope it all goes well, everyone.